Have you ever found yourself trapped in a situation so suffocating that you forgot what it felt like to breathe freely? Where are you watching from tonight? And have you ever experienced that moment when a stranger's kindness reminded you of your own worth? Tonight's story is about one such moment that changed everything. Camila Torres stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her cramped Brooklyn apartment, trying to convince herself that tonight would be different. At 24, she had the kind of natural beauty that should have made her confident, with warm brown eyes and long dark hair that caught light like silk. Instead, she found herself applying concealer to hide the fingerprint bruises on her upper arm and choosing a dress that wouldn't give Derek any reason to criticize her appearance. The black dress was conservative, hitting just below her knees, with sleeves that covered the marks completely. She'd learned to dress defensively over the past 8 months, each outfit a careful calculation designed to avoid Derek's unpredictable anger. Tonight they were going to Meridian, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, and she knew he'd chosen the venue specifically to show off. Derek Whitman loved appearing successful, loved the way expensive places made him feel important. What he didn't love was when Camila drew attention away from him. She thought back to how it had started, how normal everything had seemed those first few weeks. Derek had been charming, successful, attentive in all the right ways. He worked in finance, drove a BMW, and treated her like a princess. At least, he had until she'd moved in with him 3 months ago. That's when the criticism started. Small things at first. Her laugh was too loud. Her friends were bad influences. She spent too much money on groceries. She was gaining weight. Each comment designed to chip away at her confidence until she found herself second-guessing every decision, every word, every breath. Her phone buzzed with a text. Running late. Order me a scotch. Don't embarrass me tonight. Camilla's hands trembled as she read the message. The underlying threat was clear, even though he hadn't specified what would happen if she did embarrass him. She'd learned that Derek's punishments were creative and always designed to remind her of her place. Sometimes it was the silent treatment for days. Sometimes it was destroying something she cared about. Last week, he'd thrown her laptop against the wall because she'd laughed too long at something on a video call with her sister. The taxi ride to Meridian gave her 40 minutes to prepare herself mentally. She practiced conversations in her head, rehearsing responses that wouldn't trigger his temper. Don't mention work. He hated that her marketing job was going well. Don't talk about Rosa. Her younger sister was apparently a bad influence despite being an honor student. Don't laugh too much. Don't be too quiet. Don't look at other men. Don't look at your phone. The list of things that could set him off had grown so long she'd stopped trying to remember them all. Meridian occupied the top floor of a sleek Manhattan high-rise. All floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art that probably cost more than Camilla made in a year. The hostess, a tall blonde with the kind of polished confidence Camilla envied, led her to their usual table. Derek preferred the same spot every time, a corner booth that gave him a clear view of the entire restaurant, so he could see who was dining there and make judgments about their worth. Derek arrived 20 minutes later, his sandy brown hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate. At 31, he was handsome in a conventional way, the kind of man her mother would have called a good catch. He slid into the booth across from her without apologizing for being late, his blue eyes already scanning her appearance for flaws. "You're wearing that dress again," he said, his voice low but sharp. "I thought I told you I didn't like it." Camilla felt her stomach drop. She'd chosen this dress specifically because he'd complimented it the first time she'd worn it, back when he still said nice things about her appearance. "I thought you liked this one," she said carefully, keeping her voice soft and non-confrontational. Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a warning sign she'd learned to recognize. "Well, you thought wrong. And your makeup looks cheap. Did you even try tonight?" She had tried. She'd spent an hour getting ready, but nothing she did seemed to be right anymore. "I'm sorry," she said automatically, the words coming easier than they should have. "I can fix it in the ladies' room if you want." At the table directly behind Derek, 3 men were conducting what appeared to be a business dinner. Camilla had noticed them when she'd arrived because they commanded attention without trying. The one facing her direction was probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and the kind of presence that made other people unconsciously step aside. He wore his expensive suit like it was armor, and when their eyes had met briefly, she'd felt something electric pass between them before she'd quickly looked away. Derek was still criticizing her appearance when the waiter arrived to take their drink order. The usual, Derek said without looking up. "Macallan 18, neat. And she'll have water." Camilla bit back the urge to protest. She'd wanted wine, something to take the edge off her nerves, but Derek controlled what she ate and drank when they were out together. "Too many calories," he'd say, "or alcohol makes you stupid." She'd learned not to argue. As the evening progressed, Derek's mood continued to deteriorate. He criticized the service, the food, the other diners, and most of all, her. She was sitting wrong. She was chewing too loudly. She was looking around too much instead of paying attention to him. Each comment was delivered in a low voice designed not to carry to other tables, but his grip on his glass grew tighter with each passing minute. The man at the table behind them glanced over occasionally, and Camilla found herself hyper-aware of his presence. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that seemed unshakable. When he caught her looking, instead of the usual male assessment she was used to, his dark eyes held something like concern. She wondered if he could hear Derek's constant stream of criticism, if the careful control in her responses was as obvious to him as it felt to her. "You're not even listening to me," Derek snapped, his voice rising slightly. "I'm talking about our future, about the apartment I'm thinking of buying, and you're staring around the room like some kind of tourist." "I'm sorry," Camilla said again, focusing on him completely. "Tell me about the apartment." But Derek was past the point where apologies would help. His face was flushed from the alcohol and whatever stress he'd brought with him from work. She could see the familiar signs, the way his hands clenched and unclenched, the tight set of his shoulders. He was building toward an explosion, and she was powerless to stop it. When the waiter brought their entrees, Derek sent his back twice, claiming it wasn't cooked properly. Camilla barely touched her food, her appetite gone as tension coiled in her stomach. She could feel other diners starting to notice their table, could sense the way conversations at nearby tables had grown quieter. That's when Derek's control finally snapped. She'd reached for her water glass, a completely innocent gesture, but something about the movement set him off. His hand shot across the table and grabbed her wrist hard enough to make her gasp, his fingers digging into the soft skin where bruises from last week were finally fading. "You're pathetic," he hissed, his face close to hers, his breath hot and angry. "Sitting there like a scared little mouse, embarrassing me in front of everyone. You're done when we get home. Do you understand me?" The threat hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Camilla's blood run cold. She tried to pull her wrist free, but his grip only tightened, his fingernails digging into her skin. Around them, she was dimly aware that conversations had stopped completely, that other diners were staring, but all she could focus on was the promise of violence in Derek's eyes. That's when the stranger appeared beside their table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made Derek look up in surprise. "I think the lady would like you to let go of her wrist." Derek's grip loosened slightly, more from shock than compliance. Up close, the man was even more imposing than he'd appeared from across the restaurant. He was tall, probably 6'2", with broad shoulders that filled out his dark suit perfectly. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, and when he looked at Derek, there was something predatory in that gaze that made Camilla's breath catch. "This is a private conversation," Derek said, trying to recover his composure. "I'd appreciate it if you minded your own business." The stranger's smile was sharp as a blade. When a man puts his hands on a woman in anger, it becomes everyone's business. "Let her go." There was something in his tone that brooked no argument, something that suggested refusing wasn't really an option. Derek released Camilla's wrist so quickly she nearly fell back against the booth. She cradled her arm against her chest, feeling the pulse of her heartbeat in the places where his fingers had dug in. Derek stood up, trying to use his height to intimidate, but the stranger didn't step back. If anything, he seemed to grow larger, more dangerous, and Derek's confidence visibly wavered. "We're leaving," Derek announced, reaching for his wallet with shaking hands. "Come on, Camilla. Now." But the stranger stepped slightly to the side, not quite blocking Derek's path, but making it clear that leaving wouldn't be as simple as Derek hoped. "Actually," he said conversationally, "I think it would be better if you left alone. The lady can make her own decision about what she'd like to do." Derek's face went white, then red, then white again. "You can't just," he started, then seemed to realize that arguing with this particular man might not be wise. His gaze shifted between the stranger and Camilla, and she could see him calculating the cost of making a scene versus the humiliation of backing down. "Fine," he said finally, throwing a handful of bills on the table. "But this isn't over." He looked directly at Camilla as he said it, making sure she understood that his anger would find her later when there weren't any protectors around to interfere. The stranger watched Derek leave, his posture relaxed but alert until the elevator doors closed behind him. Then he turned to Camilla, and his expression softened completely. "Are you all right?" he asked, and she was surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. Camilla realized she was shaking, adrenaline and relief and terror all coursing through her system at once. She tried to speak, to thank him, to explain, but no words came. Instead, she found herself fighting back tears, overwhelmed by the kindness of a stranger who'd risked confrontation to help her. "Let me get you something to drink," he said, sliding into the booth across from her without invitation. "Something stronger than water. You've had a shock." He gestured to the waiter, who appeared instantly with the kind of deference that suggested this man was someone important. "2 glasses of your best brandy," he said simply, then turned his attention back to Camilla. "My name is Dante Romano, and you don't have to be afraid anymore." Later, she would remember those words as the moment her life changed forever. Not because the fear left, that would take much longer, but because for the first time in months, she believed that safety might be possible. This stranger, this Dante Romano, had stepped between her and danger without hesitation, and something in his gray-green eyes promised that he was the kind of man who could make good on his word. For now, though, she just nodded, accepted the brandy with grateful hands, and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Camilla woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through her apartment windows and the jarring realization that Derek hadn't come home. She lay in bed for long minutes, listening to the silence that should have been comforting but felt ominous instead. In the 8 months they'd lived together, Derek had never stayed out all night without explanation. His absence felt like the calm before a storm. Her wrist throbbed where he'd grabbed her, purple fingerprints blooming across her olive skin like dark flowers. She traced the marks gently, remembering the moment when that stranger, Dante Romano, had intervened. The memory felt surreal in the morning light, like something from a movie rather than her real life. Men like him didn't step in to help women like her. They certainly didn't look at her with those intense gray-green eyes like she was worth protecting. She called in sick to work, something she rarely did, but the thought of sitting in meetings and pretending everything was normal felt impossible. Her boss, Jennifer, accepted the excuse without question, probably hearing something in Camilla's voice that discouraged further inquiry. Camilla spent the morning pacing her small apartment, jumping at every sound from the hallway, expecting Derek to come bursting through the door with the full force of his fury. Around noon, he finally appeared. The buzzer rang insistently, followed by Derek's voice through the intercom, slurred and aggressive. "Camilla, open this door right now. We need to talk about last night. Open the damn door." She froze in her kitchen, cereal bowl still in her hands. Through the intercom, she could hear him pressing the button repeatedly, his voice growing louder and more threatening with each demand. Other residents would complain soon, and the thought of Derek's scene becoming public made her stomach churn with embarrassment. "I know you're up there," Derek shouted, his voice carrying through the building's thin walls. "You think you can embarrass me like that and just hide? That psychopath last night won't always be around to protect you." Camilla crept to the window overlooking the street and peered down through the blinds. Derek was pacing in front of the building entrance, his hair disheveled, his clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. Even from 4 floors up, she could see the barely contained violence in his movements, the way he kept clenching and unclenching his fists. Then she noticed something else. 2 men in dark suits stood across the street, their attention focused entirely on Derek. They weren't trying to hide their surveillance, which somehow made their presence more intimidating rather than less. When Derek noticed them and started walking in their direction, one of them simply shook his head once. Derek stopped mid-stride, his face flushing red with impotent rage. The intercom buzzed again, but this time it was the building's doorman. "Miss Torres, there are some gentlemen here who'd like to speak with you. They say it's about your safety." Camilla's hands shook as she pressed the talk button. Who are they? Security consultants, the doorman replied, and she could hear the confusion in his voice. They have identification and everything. Very professional. Send them up, she said, though every instinct screamed that this was connected to last night, to Dante Romano and whatever power he wielded that could make Derek back down. 5 minutes later, there was a soft knock at her door. She looked through the peephole and saw two men in expensive suits, both carrying themselves with the same quiet authority she'd sensed in Dante. One was older, maybe 50, with silver threading through his dark hair. The other was younger, closer to her age, with kind eyes that seemed at odds with his intimidating build. Miss Torres, the older man said when she opened the door, "We're here on behalf of Mr. Romano. May we come in?" She stepped aside, noting how they immediately assessed her apartment, their eyes cataloging exits and potential threats with professional efficiency. The older man introduced himself as Vincent, the younger as Tony, and both spoke with slight accents that suggested Italian heritage. "Mr. Romano wanted us to check on you," Vincent said, his manner respectful but direct. He was concerned that Mr. Whitman might attempt to retaliate for last night's incident. As if summoned by his words, Derek's voice echoed from the street below, shouting obscenities at the men still watching him. Vincent walked to the window and looked down with the expression of someone observing a mildly interesting insect. "How long has he been out there?" Vincent asked. "About an hour," Camilla said, wrapping her arms around herself. "He's never been this angry before. I mean, he gets mad, but this is different." Tony was examining her door locks with a frown. "Miss Torres, these wouldn't stop a determined teenager, let alone someone with Mr. Whitman's motivation. You need better security." "I can't afford better security," Camilla said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I work in marketing, not whatever business Mr. Romano is in that lets him afford private security teams." Vincent's expression softened slightly. "Cost isn't your concern right now. Your safety is. Mr. Romano has asked us to upgrade your building's security system and provide personal protection until Mr. Whitman is no longer a threat." The casual way he discussed Derek as a threat, like he was a problem that could be solved with the right resources, should have been reassuring. Instead, it highlighted how far out of her depth she'd fallen. She didn't know anything about Dante Romano except that he had the kind of power that let him command Derek's retreat with a few quiet words. "What exactly does Mr. Romano do?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. "He's a businessman," Tony said smoothly. "Import, export, construction, restaurants. He values loyalty and protects what's his." The phrasing made Camilla's pulse quicken. "I'm not his anything. He helped me last night, and I'm grateful, but that doesn't make me his responsibility." Vincent and Tony exchanged a look that suggested they knew something she didn't. "Perhaps not," Vincent said diplomatically, "but he seems to feel responsible for your welfare nonetheless." Before Camilla could respond, her apartment buzzer rang again, this time with the urgent pattern that meant emergency. She pressed the intercom button and heard her doorman's voice, tight with stress. "Miss Torres, you need to come down here right now. Someone's broken into the building's basement storage area. Your unit's been destroyed." Camilla's legs felt weak. All her important documents were in that storage unit, along with photo albums, her grandmother's jewelry, and other irreplaceable mementos. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Vincent was already on his phone, speaking in rapid Italian. When he hung up, his expression was grim. "Mr. Romano is on his way. In the meantime, we're getting you out of here." "I'm not going anywhere," Camilla said, though her voice lacked conviction. "This is my home. I won't be driven out by Derek's tantrums." Tony gestured toward the window where Derek's shouts were growing louder and more creative in their profanity. "This isn't a tantrum, Miss Torres. This is escalation. Your ex-boyfriend has moved from private abuse to public intimidation to destruction of property. The pattern suggests he's building towards something more serious." The clinical assessment sent chills down Camilla's spine. She'd lived with Derek's anger for months, but she'd never thought of it in terms of escalating patterns. She told herself each incident was isolated, that if she just tried harder, behaved better, he'd go back to being the man she'd first fallen for. Her doorman called again. "Miss Torres, the gentleman who was shouting has left, but there are more people here now. They say they're with Mr. Romano." Camilla felt like events were spinning beyond her control. 12 hours ago, Her biggest worry had been choosing an outfit that wouldn't provoke Derek's criticism. Now she was apparently caught in some kind of conflict she didn't understand, with mysterious men offering protection she couldn't afford and threats she couldn't comprehend. When Dante Romano knocked on her door 20 minutes later, she felt a complicated mix of relief and apprehension. He looked even more imposing in the daylight streaming through her apartment windows, his dark suit impeccable despite what had clearly been a rushed arrival. His gray-green eyes immediately found the bruises on her wrist, and something dangerous flickered in their depths. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the steel underneath. "I don't understand what's happening," she said honestly. "Yesterday, I was just trying to get through dinner without setting off my boyfriend's temper. Today I have security guards and broken storage units, and men talking about escalation patterns like I'm some kind of case study." Dante's expression grew thoughtful. "Derek Whitman isn't just an abusive boyfriend, Camilla. He has connections to people who don't forget perceived slights. When I intervened last night, it wasn't just his pride that took a hit. He's been talking to the wrong people about making me pay for the humiliation." The words landed like physical blows. "You're saying I'm in danger because you helped me? I'm saying you were already in danger, and now that danger has a different shape. Derek was escalating towards serious violence regardless of my involvement. But yes, my interference has complicated the situation." Camilla sank onto her couch, overwhelmed by the implications. "So what are you suggesting? That I just accept this new reality where my life is determined by other people's conflicts?" Dante sat across from her, careful to maintain distance while his presence filled the small space. "I'm suggesting you let me keep you safe while we resolve this situation permanently." "And what does that mean exactly?" "It means staying somewhere Derek can't find you. Somewhere he can't hurt you or use you to get to me. It means accepting protection until he's no longer a threat." The offer hung between them, loaded with implications that made Camilla's heart race. She thought about Derek's face when he'd grabbed her wrist, about the promise of violence in his eyes when he'd said she was done. She thought about her destroyed storage unit and the escalating pattern Tony had described. "Where would I stay?" she asked quietly. "My penthouse. It's secure, comfortable, and Derek would never think to look for you there." The idea terrified and tempted her in equal measure. Living under the protection of a man whose power she didn't understand seemed like jumping from one type of dependence to another. But the alternative was facing Derek's escalating anger alone, and last night had shown her how that might end. "I don't even know you," she whispered. Dante's smile was gentle but sad. "No, you don't. But you know Derek, and you know what he's capable of. I'm asking you to trust that I'm the safer choice." When she nodded, finally, it felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown sky. But as Dante's men efficiently packed her essential belongings and escorted her to a sleek black car, Camilla realized she'd been falling for months. At least now, someone was offering to catch her. The penthouse was everything she'd expected and nothing she'd prepared for. 40 floors above Manhattan, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art, with a kitchen that belonged in a magazine and furniture that probably cost more than her annual salary. It should have been intimidating, but Dante moved through the space with such easy comfort that it felt surprisingly warm. "I'll take the guest room," he said, showing her to what was clearly the master bedroom. "You need space to process everything that's happened." That evening, she found him in the kitchen preparing dinner with the kind of practiced ease that suggested cooking wasn't foreign to him. He'd changed from his suit into dark jeans and a simple white shirt, and the domesticity of the scene made something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "Risotto," he said when he noticed her watching. "My grandmother's recipe. She always said food was the best medicine for a traumatized heart." The gesture was so unexpected, so genuinely kind, that Camilla felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time someone had cooked for her not because they expected something in return, but simply because she needed care? "Thank you," she said, meaning it for more than just the meal. "For everything. I know you didn't have to get involved." Dante looked up from stirring the rice, his gray-green eyes serious. "Yes," he said quietly, "I did. Some things you can't walk away from, even when it's the smart choice." Later, as they ate dinner while the sun set over Manhattan, Camilla began to understand that she'd found herself under the protection of a man who was as complicated as he was dangerous. And despite every rational fear, she was beginning to think that might not be entirely bad thing. 3 days into living in Dante's penthouse, Camilla had developed a routine that felt both surreal and surprisingly comfortable. She woke each morning to the smell of espresso and fresh pastries, courtesy of Dante's housekeeper Maria, an elegant woman in her 60s who spoke limited English but communicated volumes through knowing looks and gentle pats on Camilla's shoulder. Dante left early for his various business meetings, but not before ensuring she had everything she needed for the day. The penthouse felt like a sanctuary 40 floors above the chaos of Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of Central Park, and the morning light streaming through them made everything feel clean and new. Camilla found herself working from the dining room table, her laptop looking insignificant against the polished marble surface. Her marketing job had shifted to remote work temporarily, her boss Jennifer accepting the explanation of a family emergency without pressing for details. What surprised her most was how respectful Dante was of her space and boundaries. He'd given her complete access to the penthouse, but never made her feel like she owed him anything for his protection. When she tentatively asked about paying rent or contributing to expenses, he looked genuinely confused by the suggestion. "Your safety isn't a business transaction, Camilla," he'd said simply. "It's just the right thing to do." The statement had stayed with her because it was so different from Derek's approach to everything. Derek kept running tallies of favors and debts, constantly reminding her of what she owed him. Dante seemed to operate from an entirely different value system, one where protecting someone he cared about was as natural as breathing. On Thursday afternoon, she was reviewing campaign analytics when the elevator opened to admit 2 people she hadn't met before. The first was a man probably in his late 20s, with dark hair and sharp features that spoke of Italian heritage. He moved with the same confident grace she'd noticed in Dante. But where Dante's presence was commanding, this man's energy was more restless, like he was always ready for action. The second person was clearly related to Dante, sharing his gray-green eyes and aristocratic bone structure, but feminized into striking beauty. She was probably Camilla's age, with long black hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and wearing the kind of designer dress that costs more than most people's monthly rent. When she smiled, though, her expression was warm and genuine. "You must be Camilla," the woman said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Sofia Romano, Dante's sister. And this is Marco Benedetti, his right hand and the closest thing he has to a voice of reason." Marco grinned and shook her hand with calloused fingers that suggested his work wasn't entirely office-based. "Though I'm not sure how reasonable I actually am." Dante certainly doesn't think so. Camilla found herself relaxing despite her nervousness. There was something immediately likable about both of them, a warmth that put her at ease. Sophia settled onto the couch with practiced grace while Marco wandered to the kitchen and began making himself comfortable. "Dante's told us about your situation," Sophia said gently. "I wanted to meet you and make sure you have everything you need. My brother can be wonderfully protective, but sometimes overlooks the practical details." "He's been very thoughtful, actually," Camilla said, then felt compelled to add, "though I still don't really understand what his business involves. He mentioned construction and restaurants, but there's clearly more to it." Sophia and Marco exchanged a look that confirmed Camilla's suspicion. Sophia's expression grew more serious as she seemed to weigh her words carefully. "My brother operates several legitimate businesses," Sophia said finally. "Romano Construction, 3 high-end restaurants, an import company that brings Italian goods to New York. But he also provides certain services that aren't advertised in the yellow pages." "Such as?" Camilla asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the full answer. "Protection," Marco said bluntly, returning from the kitchen with the espresso cup. "Dispute resolution. Making sure certain agreements are honored when the legal system isn't sufficient. He's what you might call a problem solver for people who have problems the police can't or won't handle." The explanation was carefully neutral, but Camilla understood the implications. Dante was connected to organized crime in some capacity, though apparently not in the way she'd imagined from movies and television shows. His world seemed more subtle, more business-oriented, but no less dangerous. "Does that frighten you?" Sophia asked, watching Camilla's face carefully. "It should," Camilla admitted. "But honestly, I'm more afraid of Derek than I am of whatever Dante does for a living. Derek's violence feels personal and unpredictable. Dante's power seems more controlled, more purposeful." Sophia nodded approvingly. You understand him better than most people do. Dante has a code, rules he never breaks. He doesn't hurt innocent people. He protects family, friends, people who can't protect themselves. But he's also not someone you want as an enemy. Marco had been studying Camilla throughout this conversation, and now he spoke up. The thing about loving a man in our world, he said, his tone gentle but serious, is that you become part of that world whether you choose to or not. Dante's enemies become your enemies. His responsibilities become your responsibilities. It's not a decision to make lightly. The word loving hit Camilla like a physical blow. Was that what was happening here? She'd been so focused on the immediate danger from Derek that she hadn't examined her growing feelings for Dante. But when she thought about the way her heart raced when he entered a room, the way his rare smiles made her feel warm all over, the way she'd started listening for his key in the door each evening, she realized Marco might be right about the direction of her emotions. I don't know what I feel, she said honestly. 3 days ago, I'd never spoken to him. Now I'm living in his home, under his protection, and I find myself thinking about him constantly. It's confusing. Sophia's expression softened with understanding. When I met my husband, I thought I was too smart to fall for a dangerous man. I had plans, a career, a careful life mapped out. Then Antonio walked into my art gallery, and everything I thought I wanted suddenly seemed less important than being with him. The vulnerability in Sophia's voice made Camilla look up sharply. You understand what I'm going through. Better than you know. The difference is that I had months to get to know Antonio gradually, to understand his world before I committed to it. You're being thrown into the deep end during a crisis, which makes everything more intense and more complicated. Before Camilla could respond, they heard the elevator and Dante's distinctive footsteps crossing the marble foyer. He appeared in the living room doorway still wearing his business suit, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, looking like he'd had a long day dealing with complicated problems. His gray-green eyes found Camilla first, checking that she was safe and comfortable, before shifting to his sister and Marco with a mixture of affection and wariness. I see you've introduced yourselves, he said, settling into the chair across from Camilla. Please tell me you haven't been scaring her with family stories. Only the appropriate ones, Sophia said innocently. I was explaining about your legitimate businesses and how they occasionally require unconventional problem-solving methods. Dante's expression grew more serious as he looked at Camilla. What do you think about what you've learned? Camilla considered the question carefully. She thought about Derek's escalating threats, about the security team now monitoring her building, about the way Dante had stepped between her and danger without hesitation. I think, she said slowly, that I'm grateful to be protected by someone with unconventional problem-solving methods rather than trying to handle Derek on my own. And I think your family cares about you enough to want to make sure I understand what I might be getting into. Dante's smile was small but genuine. They're protective of me, and by extension, of anyone I care about. The simple statement that he cared about her made Camilla's pulse quicken. There was something in his eyes as he said it, a depth of feeling that went beyond simple concern for her safety. She found herself wondering what it would be like to be truly cared for by a man like Dante Romano, to have all that power and protection focused on her happiness rather than her destruction. Marco stood up, stretching with cat-like grace. We should let you two talk. But Camilla, if you have questions about anything, about this life, or what it means to be part of it, you can ask me or Sophia. We want you to make informed decisions. Sophia kissed both of Camilla's cheeks in the European style, before following Marco to the elevator. Take care of yourself, she murmured quietly. And remember that loving a dangerous man doesn't make you weak. Sometimes it makes you stronger than you ever imagined you could be. After they left, Camilla and Dante sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the penthouse's modern furniture and making everything feel intimate and warm. Your sister is remarkable, Camilla said finally. She has your strength, but with more warmth. Dante laughed softly. Sophia would argue that I'm plenty warm with the right people. She just brings it out more easily than I do. Are you warm with me? Camilla asked, then immediately felt her cheeks flush at the boldness of the question. Dante's eyes grew serious as they met hers. You make me feel things I haven't felt in a very long time, Camilla. Things I wasn't sure I was still capable of feeling. Such as? Hope, he said simply. The possibility that life could be about more than just duty and responsibility and protecting what's mine. The idea that someone could see who I really am and choose to stay anyway. The honesty in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. She wanted to cross the room and touch his face, to tell him that she was already choosing to stay, that what she'd learned about his world today had only made her more certain that he was worth whatever risks came with loving him. Instead, she found herself sharing something she'd never told anyone. Derek wasn't always the way he is now, she said quietly. When we first met, he was charming and attentive and made me feel special. The violence came gradually, so slowly that I didn't notice it was happening until I was already trapped. Dante's expression grew dangerous at the mention of Derek, but his voice remained gentle when he spoke. What made you realize you were trapped? Last month, she said, wrapping her arms around herself as the memory surfaced. I was talking to my sister Rosa on the phone. She'd gotten into Columbia with a full scholarship, and I was so excited for her. I was laughing and celebrating with her when Derek came home. He said my laughter was too loud, that I was being inconsiderate of his stress from work. When I tried to explain what I was happy about, he grabbed my phone and threw it against the wall. The simple cruelty of the act still made her angry. He destroyed something that mattered to me because I was happy about something that didn't involve him. That's when I realized that my joy threatened him somehow, that he needed me to be small and sad to feel powerful. Dante was very still as she spoke, but she could see the controlled fury in the set of his shoulders. No one will ever make you feel small again, he said, and it sounded like a vow. You deserve to laugh as loudly as you want, to celebrate the people you love, to take up space in the world. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something inside her chest crack open. This was what it felt like to be truly cared for, she realized. Not possessed or controlled, but treasured and protected and encouraged to be fully herself. Dante, she began, moving closer to him on the couch, but before she could finish the thought, his phone rang with the sharp tone that indicated an emergency call. He answered immediately, his expression shifting to professional alertness as he listened to whoever was on the other end. When he hung up, his jaw was tight with anger. Derek's escalating, he said grimly. He's been making calls to people he shouldn't be talking to, people who have no love for my family. The situation is becoming more complicated. Before Camilla could ask what that meant, the penthouse's landline rang. Dante looked surprised, since very few people had that number, but he answered it with cautious wariness. Romano residence. There was a pause. Then Dante's expression shifted to something cold and deadly. He held out the phone to Camilla. It's for you. With shaking hands, she took the receiver. Hello? Hello, sweetheart. Derek's voice was slurred with alcohol, but sharp with vicious satisfaction. Did you think you could hide from me forever? Did you think your new boyfriend's money could protect you from what you owe me? How did you get this number? She whispered. I have friends you haven't met yet, Derek said with ugly laughter. Friends who are very interested in teaching your protector a lesson about interfering in other people's relationships. You're going to come home, Camilla, tonight, or things are going to get very unpleasant for everyone you care about. The line went dead, leaving Camilla staring at the phone in her hand. Across from her, Dante's gray-green eyes had gone completely cold, and for the first time since she'd met him, she understood exactly why other people found him frightening. This ends now, he said quietly, and something in his voice promised that Derek had just made the last mistake of his life. Outside the penthouse windows, Manhattan sparkled in the evening light, beautiful and dangerous and full of possibilities. Camilla realized that whatever happened next, there would be no going back to the life she'd known before. She was part of Dante's world now, for better or worse, and that world was about to go to war. The harassment started at 9:30 on Monday morning, just as Camilla was settling into her first video conference call of the week from Dante's penthouse. Her phone rang repeatedly with unknown numbers, each caller hanging up as soon as she answered. By 10 o'clock, her email inbox was flooded with messages from fake accounts, all containing variations of the same message. Hiding won't work forever. Jennifer called shortly after 11, her voice tight with professional concern and barely concealed frustration. Camilla, I need you to explain what's happening here. We've had 7 delivery trucks show up this morning claiming to have orders for you. Pizza, Chinese food, flowers, a mariachi band. Our security is overwhelmed, and our lobby looks like a carnival. Camilla's stomach dropped as she realized Derek had escalated to attacking her workplace. She could picture him sitting somewhere with his laptop, methodically ordering every service he could find to her office building, probably laughing as he imagined the chaos he was creating. "I'm so sorry, Jennifer," she said, her voice shaking with humiliation. "This is personal harassment from my ex. I had no idea he would involve the office." "Well, he has, and it's becoming a problem. We've also had a man in the lobby asking questions about you, claiming to be your boyfriend and demanding to know if you're here. Security had to escort him out, but he's been circling the building for the last hour." The image of Derek stalking around her office building, probably working himself into an even greater rage, made Camilla feel sick. Her coworkers didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of his vendetta, and she knew from experience that Derek's imagination for revenge was limitless. "I'll resign," she said quickly, hating how the words tasted but knowing it was the only solution. "I can't put everyone at risk because of my personal situation." "Camilla, you don't have to make that decision right now," Jennifer said, but there was relief in her voice that suggested it was the outcome she'd hoped for. "Maybe take some extended leave instead. When your situation resolves, we can discuss bringing you back." They both knew that was a polite fiction. In the competitive world of Manhattan marketing agencies, taking extended leave for personal drama was career suicide. Camilla was effectively unemployed as of this conversation, another casualty of Derek's determination to destroy everything good in her life. After she hung up, Camilla sat in the penthouse's pristine living room and tried not to cry. Losing her job felt like losing the last piece of independence she had left. She'd worked so hard to build her career, to prove herself in a competitive field, and now Derek had taken even that away from her. When Dante returned home 2 hours earlier than usual, his expression was grimmer than she'd ever seen it. "Derek won't be bothering your workplace anymore," he said without preamble, but there was something in his tone that suggested the resolution hadn't been pleasant. "What did you do?" Camilla asked, though part of her was afraid to know. "I explained to him very clearly that harassing innocent people to get to you was unacceptable behavior. I also made it clear that if he continued this campaign, the consequences would be severe and permanent." The clinical way Dante described what had clearly been a violent confrontation sent chills through Camilla. She'd seen glimpses of the dangerous man beneath his polished exterior, but this was the first time she'd been confronted with concrete evidence of what he was capable of. "He hurt people at my office, didn't he?" she said quietly. "Security guards, delivery drivers, innocent people just doing their jobs." Dante's jaw tightened. No one was seriously injured. But yes, he caused problems for people who didn't deserve it. That's why I had to make the message unmistakable. Camilla felt tears prick her eyes as the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. "I quit my job," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't let him keep using my workplace to hurt people. So now I'm unemployed and homeless and completely dependent on your charity, just like he wanted." "You're not dependent on charity," Dante said sharply, moving closer to her on the couch. "You're under my protection because I choose to protect you. There's a difference, is there? Because from where I'm sitting, I've lost everything that made me who I was, and now I'm just another problem for you to solve with your unconventional methods." The bitterness in her own voice surprised her. She wasn't angry at Dante, exactly, but she was furious at the circumstances that had stripped away her agency and left her feeling like a burden rather than a person worth caring about. Dante was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with those intense gray-green eyes. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than she'd expected. "Would you like to know what Derek said to me today when I found him outside your office building?" Camilla nodded, though she wasn't sure she was prepared for the answer. "He said he was going to make me pay for taking what belonged to him. He said he'd rather see you destroyed than let another man have you. He wasn't trying to win you back, Camilla. He was trying to punish you for leaving." The words hit her like physical blows because they rang so true. Derek had never fought for their relationship when she'd tried to talk to him about his behavior. He'd only become violent when she'd started pulling away, as if her independence itself was the real threat to his ego. That's when Dante delivered the news that changed everything. "There's something else you need to know," he said, his expression growing even more serious. "Derek has been making contact with people in rival organizations, offering them information about my business operations in exchange for help getting to you. He's willing to endanger both our lives to satisfy his need for revenge. The betrayal cut deeper than Camilla had expected. She'd known Derek was capable of hurting her, but the idea that he would actively try to get her killed rather than let her find happiness with someone else revealed a depth of selfishness that left her breathless. "He's trying to have me killed," she said, needing to hear the words out loud to make them real. "He's trying to use you as a weapon against me," Dante corrected grimly. In his mind, if he can't control you, then no one should have you. The casual cruelty of it broke something inside Camilla's chest. Months of walking on eggshells, of trying to be good enough, of believing that if she could just love Derek better, he would stop hurting her. And all along he'd been capable of this level of viciousness. She'd been trying to fix a relationship with someone who saw her as property to be disposed of rather than a person to be loved. The tears came then, hot and angry and full of grief for the naive woman she'd been just a week ago. She cried for the job she'd lost, for the safety she'd never really had, for the months she'd spent diminishing herself to accommodate a man who had never valued her as anything more than an object to possess. Dante moved closer on the couch, his presence warm and solid and reassuring. "May I?" he asked quietly, and when she nodded, he pulled her against his chest and let her cry until the storm of emotion exhausted itself. "I feel so stupid," she whispered against his shirt. "All this time I thought I was the problem. I thought if I could just be better, less demanding, more accommodating, he would go back to the way he was when we first met." "You weren't stupid," Dante said fiercely, his hand stroking her hair with infinite gentleness. "You were trying to love someone who wasn't capable of loving you back. That's not stupidity, that's hope. And there's nothing wrong with hoping for the best in people. But there was wrong with staying when they show you who they really are," Camilla said, pulling back to look at him. "I stayed too long, accepted too much, let him convince me that his violence was somehow my fault." Dante's hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "You survived," he said simply. "You found the strength to walk away, even when it was dangerous. You're here now, and you're safe, and you're never going back to that life." The conviction in his voice made her heart race. There was something in his gray-green eyes that went beyond protectiveness, something deeper and more personal that made her pulse quicken with awareness. "Dante," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes? When you look at me, what do you see?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze intense as it moved over her face. "I see a woman who survived something that would have destroyed weaker people. I see intelligence and kindness and a strength you don't even know you possess yet. I see someone worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth loving." The last word hung between them like a bridge she could choose to cross or leave unbuilt. Camilla realized that sitting in his arms, feeling truly safe for the first time in months, she knew what her choice would be. She kissed him. It was tentative at first, just a soft press of lips that could have been gratitude or comfort. But when he responded, his mouth moving against hers with careful hunger, the kiss deepened into something that acknowledged all the tension that had been building between them since that first night at the restaurant. Dante kissed like he did everything else, with focused intensity and complete attention to her reactions. His hands remained gentle on her face even as the kiss grew more urgent, and when she made a soft sound of pleasure, he pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything, or like this is expected because of the situation we're in." The careful way he checked for her consent, the genuine concern in his voice that she might feel pressured, only made her more certain of her decision. This was what healthy desire felt like, she realized. Not the demanding possession Derek had disguised as passion, but genuine care for her comfort and agency. "I'm sure," she said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I want this, Dante. I want you." When he kissed her again, it was with less restraint but no less tenderness. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer until she was nearly in his lap, and she could feel the controlled strength in his touch, the way he held back even as desire clearly consumed him. The afternoon sun streaming through the penthouse windows turned everything golden and warm as they moved together to his bedroom. Dante took his time undressing her, his mouth following the path of his hands, treating her body like something precious and worthy of worship. After months of feeling like she had to diminish herself to be acceptable, His obvious pleasure in her responses was intoxicating. When they finally came together, it was with a connection that felt both physical and emotional. Dante murmured her name like a prayer, his focus entirely on her pleasure, on making sure she felt cherished and desired, and completely safe in his arms. The intimacy was overwhelming in the best possible way, replacing months of feeling small and frightened with the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the golden afternoon light, Dante's fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Camilla felt transformed, like she'd rediscovered parts of herself she'd forgotten existed. For the first time in months, she felt beautiful, powerful, worthy of love and protection and devotion. "I didn't know it could be like that," she admitted quietly, her cheek pressed against his chest. "Like what?" Dante asked, his voice warm with satisfaction and tenderness. "Gentle," she said. "Connected. Like you actually wanted to be with me rather than just wanted to possess me." Dante's arms tightened around her, and she could feel something shift in his breathing. "Camilla," he said seriously, "I need you to understand something. What I feel for you isn't possession. It's not about owning you or controlling you. It's about wanting to build something with you, wanting to make you happy, wanting to be the man you choose to trust with your heart." The honesty in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. She turned in his arms to look at him, taking in the vulnerability in his expression, the way his carefully controlled facade had softened completely. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said, the words coming out before she could second-guess herself. Dante's smile was brilliant and beautiful and full of relief. "I'm already there," he admitted. "I've been falling since the moment I saw you trying to disappear at that restaurant. You were so brave, even when you were terrified, and I knew I wanted to be the kind of man who could make you feel safe enough to shine." They might have stayed there all evening, wrapped in each other in the golden light, if Dante's phone hadn't started ringing with the urgent tone that indicated an emergency. He ignored it the first time, but when it rang again immediately, his expression shifted back to professional alertness. "Romano," he answered, his free arm still holding Camilla close. She could hear the rapid Italian on the other end of the line, could see Dante's expression growing darker with each word. When he hung up, the tenderness had been replaced by something cold and deadly. "What is it?" she asked, though his expression already told her it was bad news. "Derek has your sister," Dante said grimly. "Rosa never made it home from her evening classes. There was a struggle in the parking garage, and witnesses saw her forced into a van. He left a message saying he wants to make a trade." The words hit Camilla like ice water, shock and terror replacing the warm contentment she'd been floating in moments before. Rosa was only 22, brilliant and kind, and completely innocent of whatever war Derek had declared. The idea of her sister being frightened and hurt because of Camilla's choices was unbearable. "He's using her to get to me," Camilla said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. "Yes," Dante said, already reaching for his clothes. "And that was his final mistake. No one threatens my family and gets away with it. And Camilla," he looked at her seriously, "as of this afternoon, your family." The declaration might have been romantic under other circumstances. Right now, it felt like a battle cry. "I'm coming with you," Camilla said, pulling on her own clothes with shaking hands. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. She's my sister," Camilla said fiercely, and for the first time since this nightmare had started, her voice carried the kind of authority that made Dante pause. "I'm not sitting here safe and comfortable while Rosa pays the price for my choices. I'm done being passive, Dante. I'm done letting other people fight my battles for me." Something in her tone must have convinced him that arguing would be futile. His expression was grim but proud as he nodded once. "Then we go together," he said. "But we do this my way, with my people, and you follow my orders without question once we're in the field." "Agreed?" "Agreed," Camilla said, and meant it. She was done being Derek's victim, done letting him take everything she cared about. If he wanted a war, she was ready to give him one. Outside the penthouse windows, Manhattan blazed with evening light, beautiful and merciless. Rosa was somewhere out there, frightened and in danger, and Derek was about to learn that taking Dante Romano's family had consequences he couldn't imagine. For the first time since this had all started, Camilla felt like herself again. Not the diminished, frightened woman Derek had tried to create, but the strong, intelligent person she'd always been underneath. Whatever happened tonight, she was done being anyone's victim. The warehouse in Red Hook stood dark against the Brooklyn waterfront, its broken windows like dead eyes staring out over the harbor. Camilla sat in the passenger seat of Dante's car, watching the building through binoculars while his team moved into position around the perimeter. The waiting was agony, knowing that Rosa was somewhere inside that desolate structure, probably terrified and wondering if anyone would come for her. Marco's voice crackled through the radio. Thermal imaging shows 3 heat signatures on the second floor, east corner. 2 large, 1 smaller. The smaller one isn't moving much. That would be Rosa, Camilla said, her throat tight with fear and rage. Derek's probably tied her up. He used to threaten to do that to me when I didn't behave the way he wanted. Dante's hands clenched on the steering wheel, but his voice remained professionally calm when he responded to Marco. Any sign of additional backup? Negative. Looks like it's just Derek and one other person. Either he couldn't get the help he thought he could, or this is a trap. It's not a trap, Camilla said with grim certainty. Derek's too arrogant to think he needs backup against me. In his mind, I'm just a weak woman who's been hiding behind your protection. He probably thinks I'll come running in alone to save Rosa, and then he'll have both of us. Dante turned to study her face in the dim light from the dashboard. What are you thinking? Camilla took a deep breath, centering herself around the plan that had been forming in her mind during the drive to Brooklyn. Derek expects me to be the same frightened woman he's been tormenting for months. What if we use that against him? She outlined her idea quickly, watching Dante's expression shift from protective concern to grudging admiration as he realized the psychological advantage her plan would create. It was risky, requiring her to walk into the warehouse alone while his team moved into position, but it would give them the element of surprise they needed. You don't have to do this, Dante said when she finished explaining. We can go in hard and fast, overwhelm them before they can react. And risk Rosa getting hurt in the crossfire? Camilla shook her head. Derek's holding her specifically because he knows I'll do anything to keep her safe. Let me use that connection to our advantage. 20 minutes later, Camilla walked through the warehouse's main entrance with her hands visible and empty, playing the role of the terrified victim one last time. The building smelled of rust and abandonment, and her footsteps echoed in the cavernous space as she made her way to the metal staircase leading to the second floor. She found Derek exactly where the thermal imaging had indicated, in what had once been a supervisor's office overlooking the main warehouse floor. Rosa was bound to a chair in the corner, duct tape over her mouth and terror in her dark eyes, but she appeared unharmed. The relief Camilla felt at seeing her sister alive and relatively unhurt gave her the strength to face Derek with something approaching calm. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive clothes wrinkled and stained, and there was a manic gleam in his eyes that spoke of desperation and whatever substances he'd been using to maintain his courage. The other man in the room was someone she didn't recognize, probably mid-40s with the kind of hard face that suggested violence was his primary profession. There she is, Derek said with ugly satisfaction. My beautiful, ungrateful girlfriend who thought she could embarrass me and just walk away. Camilla forced herself to adopt the submissive posture she perfected during their relationship, shoulders rounded, eyes down, the picture of feminine helplessness. I'm sorry, Derek. I never meant to hurt you. I just want Rosa to be safe. Oh, you're sorry now, Derek laughed harshly. Now that there are consequences for your choices. Where's your tough guy protector now, Camilla? Where's the big bad crime boss who was going to keep you safe? He's not coming. Camilla lied smoothly, letting tears gather in her eyes. When he found out you had Rosa, he said it wasn't his problem anymore. He said he didn't sign up to risk his life for my family. The lie hit Derek's ego exactly the way she'd hoped it would. His expression shifted from manic triumph to satisfied vindication, and she could practically see him savoring what he believed was her abandonment by another man who'd grown tired of her neediness. That's what men like him do, Derek said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone she remembered too well. They use women like you until the situation gets complicated, then they move on to someone easier, someone less damaged. The casual cruelty of his words might have devastated the woman she'd been a week ago. Now, they just made her angry. She thought about the way Dante had held her that afternoon, the reverence in his touch, The way he'd looked at her like she was precious and strong and worthy of protection. The contrast between Derek's poisonous view of relationships and Dante's genuine care was so stark, it was almost laughable. "So what happens now?" she asked, playing her role perfectly while mentally calculating distances and angles. "Now you come home with me," Derek said, his satisfaction evident. "We're going to go back to the way things were. Except this time you're going to remember what happens when you try to leave. Your sister is going to serve as insurance that you'll behave yourself." The casual assumption that he could simply reclaim her, that she would meekly return to being his victim, revealed how little Derek had ever understood her. Even at her most broken, even when his manipulation had nearly succeeded in convincing her she was worthless, some core part of her had never surrendered. Now, strengthened by Dante's love and her own rediscovered sense of self-worth, she was done pretending to be smaller than she was. "The thing is, Derek," she said, and her voice carried a new note of authority that made both men look at her sharply. "I'm not the same woman you've been terrorizing for the past 8 months." That's when everything happened very quickly. Camilla dove toward Rosa's chair, using her body to shield her sister as Derek lunged forward with a snarl of rage. His hired muscle reached for the gun tucked into his waistband, but Marco and 2 other men crashed through the office windows in a symphony of breaking glass and controlled violence. Derek made one last desperate attempt to reach Camilla, his face twisted with the kind of rage that had no logic behind it, just the need to hurt what he couldn't control. But Camilla was no longer frozen by fear of him. She grabbed a heavy ashtray from the desk and swung it with all her strength, catching Derek across the temple and sending him staggering backward. The sound he made when he hit the concrete wall was final and permanent. Dante appeared in the doorway as the echoes faded, his expression cold and deadly until his eyes found Camilla and Rosa. Then his face transformed with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Are you hurt?" he asked, moving to check on both sisters while Marco and his team secured the scene. "We're fine," Camilla said, working to untie Rosa's restraints with shaking hands. "Just shaken up." Rosa pulled the duct tape from her mouth with a gasp, her first words a stream of inventive curses that would have made their grandmother blush. When she finally ran out of profanity, she looked up at Camilla with tears streaming down her face. "I thought he was going to kill us both," Rosa whispered. "He kept talking about how you belonged to him, how if he couldn't have you then no one could." "Camilla, he was planning to hurt you so badly." The confirmation of Derek's ultimate intentions hit Camilla like a physical blow. She'd known he was capable of violence, had lived with the reality of it for months, but the scope of what he'd been planning was still shocking. "It's over now," she said firmly, helping Rosa to her feet and holding her close. "He can't hurt anyone anymore." Later, after Rosa had been checked by paramedics and given a statement to the police officers on Dante's payroll, after the warehouse had been cleaned and secured and Derek's body removed, Camilla found herself sitting in Dante's living room trying to process everything that had happened. The violence had been swift and decisive, exactly as Dante had promised, but watching him operate in his professional capacity had given her a visceral understanding of what being part of his world really meant. He'd eliminated Derek without hesitation or remorse, and while Camilla was grateful for the protection, she also understood that this was who Dante was beneath the careful courtesy and gentle domesticity. "You're having second thoughts," Dante said quietly, settling on the couch beside her with 2 glasses of brandy. "Not second thoughts, exactly," Camilla said, accepting the drink gratefully. "But I'm trying to process what it means to love someone who can kill without blinking when the situation requires it." Dante was quiet for a long moment, staring into his brandy like it might contain answers to questions he'd never wanted to ask. "Would you prefer if I'd let Derek continue threatening you and Rosa? If I tried to resolve this through legal channels that would have taken months while he escalated his campaign of terror?" "No," Camilla said immediately. "I'm grateful that you protected us. I'm grateful that Rosa is safe and that Derek will never hurt another woman the way he hurt me. It's just, watching you tonight, seeing how easily you shifted from the gentle man who made love to me this afternoon to someone who could orchestrate Derek's death without flinching. It's a lot to take in." Dante set his glass down and turned to face her fully. "Camilla, if being with me means you'll always be afraid of what I'm capable of, then maybe you should walk away now. I can make sure you and Rosa are safe, set you up somewhere Derek's associates will never find you. You don't have to choose this life just because I love you. The offer was genuine. She could hear it in his voice, and that only made her more certain of her answer. She thought about the man who'd cooked for her when she was lost, who'd held her while she cried, who'd made her feel worthy of love and protection. She thought about the way he'd checked for her consent before kissing her, the way he'd put Rosa's safety above his own strategic advantage. I'm not afraid of what you're capable of, she said finally. I'm in awe of it. You used all that power, all that capacity for violence, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Derek used his strength to control and diminish. You used yours to liberate and defend. There's a difference, and I see it clearly. Dante's expression grew hopeful but uncertain. So what are you saying? I'm saying that I love you. All of you, including the parts that are dangerous when they need to be. I'm saying that I choose this life, this world, you, with full understanding of what that means. Dante's smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms. I was hoping you'd say that, because I have something to ask you. When he dropped to one knee beside the couch, producing a simple but stunning diamond ring from his jacket pocket, Camilla's heart stopped beating for what felt like several seconds. Camilla Torres, Dante said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his gray-green eyes. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life protecting you and loving you and making sure you never have to be afraid again? The proposal was simple and perfect and exactly what she needed to hear. No grand gestures or elaborate speeches, just a promise of safety and devotion from a man who had already proven he would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with happiness as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Yes, absolutely yes. When he kissed her, it tasted like new beginnings and hard-won freedom and the promise of a future where she would never again have to make herself smaller to accommodate someone else's insecurities. Outside the penthouse windows, Manhattan sparkled with possibility, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Camilla felt like she belonged exactly where she was. 6 months later, Camilla stood in the courtyard of a 13th-century villa in Sicily, surrounded by olive trees and Mediterranean sunshine, wearing a wedding dress that made her feel like a princess from a fairy tale. The ivory silk moved like water when she walked, and the antique lace had been worn by 3 generations of Romano women before her. Most importantly, it was her choice, selected because she loved it rather than because someone else approved. Rosa fussed with the cathedral-length veil, her movements careful and precise as she arranged the delicate fabric. Her sister had recovered beautifully from the trauma of her kidnapping, partly because Dante had insisted on paying for the best therapist in New York, and partly because Rosa possessed the same inner strength that had eventually allowed Camilla to break free from Derek's control. Now Rosa was preparing to start her graduate program at Oxford, studying international relations with a focus on human trafficking prevention, a path inspired by her own experience with violence and her sister's work with abuse survivors. You look perfect, Rosa said, stepping back to admire her handiwork, like something out of a Renaissance painting, but happier. Camilla smiled at her sister's reflection in the antique mirror that had been carried outside for the occasion. She did look happy, she realized, in a way that went bone deep. The past 6 months had been a revelation in what life could feel like when shared with someone who genuinely wanted her happiness above all else. After Derek's death, Camilla had struggled initially with the sudden absence of fear from her daily routine. She'd catch herself bracing for criticism that never came, apologizing for opinions that were welcomed and valued, making herself smaller out of habit rather than necessity. But gradually, supported by Dante's patient love and her own rediscovered strength, she'd begun to expand back into the full size of herself. The nonprofit job had been Dante's suggestion, though he presented it as an opportunity rather than a directive. Safe Harbor provided resources and advocacy for domestic abuse survivors, and when Camilla had interviewed with the director, she'd found her calling. Using her marketing skills to raise awareness and funds, while also providing direct support to women escaping dangerous relationships, had given her a sense of purpose she'd never experienced in corporate marketing. The work was sometimes difficult, forcing her to confront the reality that Derek's behavior hadn't been unique or even uncommon. But it was also healing, allowing her to transform her own painful experience into something that could help others find their way to safety and independence. Every woman she helped served as proof that survival was possible, that strength could be reclaimed, that love didn't have to hurt. "Ready, Principessa?" Dante's voice came from the doorway, and Camilla turned to see him leaning against the stone archway with an expression of wonder that made her heart skip. He looked magnificent in his dark suit, but more than that, he looked peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. The past 6 months had changed him too, though more subtly. He'd gradually shifted his business operations toward the completely legitimate enterprises, using his wealth and influence to build something sustainable rather than just powerful. The construction company was thriving, the restaurants had expanded to include a successful catering business, and the import company had developed partnerships with artisan producers throughout Italy. He was still formidable, still commanded respect and loyalty from his people, but he'd chosen to use his capabilities to build rather than destroy. "More than ready," Camilla said, accepting his offered arm. "Though I have to admit, this feels like something from a dream." "The best kind of dream," Dante replied, leading her toward the garden where their guests were assembled. The ceremony itself was a beautiful blend of traditional Italian customs and modern sensibilities, officiated by a priest who'd known Dante's family for generations and conducted partly in Italian, partly in English. Camilla's mother had flown in from Arizona, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter marry a man who clearly treasured her beyond measure. Dante's extended family had embraced Camilla completely, treating her not as an outsider who'd been grudgingly accepted, but as a daughter and sister who'd finally found her way home. Sophia served as matron of honor, resplendent in deep blue silk and radiating happiness for her brother's joy. Marco stood as best man, his usually serious expression softened by genuine emotion as he watched his closest friend claim the happiness he'd never expected to find. When Dante slipped the simple platinum band onto Camilla's finger, his gray-green eyes were bright with unshed tears. "With this ring, I promise to protect you, to cherish you, to support your dreams, and to build new dreams with you, to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me." Camilla's own vows were equally heartfelt. "With this ring, I promise to love you completely, to trust your strength while maintaining my own, to build a life with you that honors both who we were and who we're becoming together." The kiss that sealed their marriage was gentle and reverent and full of promise, witnessed by olive trees and ancient stones, and people who'd learned to appreciate the miracle of two wounded souls healing each other through love. The reception was held in the villa's main hall, a soaring space with frescoed ceilings and tall windows that framed the Sicilian countryside. Local musicians filled the air with traditional songs, while guests from two very different worlds mingled with surprising ease. Camilla's college friends chatted with Marco's security team, her sister debated politics with Sophia's husband, and everyone seemed united in their genuine happiness for the newlyweds. Sophia's toast, delivered in her warm contralto voice, brought tears to half the room. "I've known my brother for 33 years, she said, raising her champagne glass, "and I've never seen him at peace the way he is with Camilla." She didn't just accept his love, she transformed it into something beautiful and sustainable. "Tonight we're not just celebrating a marriage, we're celebrating the proof that love really can conquer fear, that strength can be gentle, that two people can save each other if they're brave enough to try." The applause was thunderous and heartfelt, but Camilla was focused on Dante's face, on the way his expression had softened with gratitude and love and the kind of contentment she'd once thought was only possible in fairy tales. Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and the villa had settled into peaceful quiet, Camilla and Dante walked hand in hand through the olive groves under a canopy of stars. The night air was warm and fragrant with jasmine, and somewhere in the distance, the Mediterranean whispered against ancient cliffs. "Do you ever think about that night at Meridian?" Camilla asked, her wedding dress rustling softly in the evening breeze. "Every day," Dante replied immediately. "I think about how close I came to not intervening, to deciding it wasn't my business. I think about what would have happened if I'd chosen to look away instead of stepping in." Camilla shivered despite the warm night, considering an alternate reality where Derek's escalating violence had continued unchecked. "But you didn't look away," she said firmly. "You saw someone who needed help, and you chose to help, even though it complicated your life and put you at risk." Best decision I ever made, Dante said simply, stopping to face her under the ancient trees. You saved me as much as I saved you, you know. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have something worth protecting beyond duty and obligation. You reminded me that life could be about more than just surviving. The honesty in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. They'd both been damaged when they'd found each other, both carrying wounds from their respective pasts. But together, they'd created something neither could have achieved alone, a love that was built on mutual respect and genuine care rather than need or fear or the desire to possess. I love you, Dante Romano, she said, the words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. And I love you, Camilla Romano, he replied, her new name falling from his lips like a benediction. When he kissed her under the Sicilian stars, surrounded by the scent of jasmine and the whisper of ancient winds, Camilla thought about how dramatically her life had changed from that terrifying night when Derek had grabbed her wrist and threatened her future. She'd been so afraid then, so convinced that she was trapped in a situation with no escape, that the violence would only escalate until it consumed her completely. Now she understood that sometimes rescue came from the most unexpected places, in the form of a dangerous man with gentle hands and eyes like storm clouds who'd seen her worth even when she'd forgotten it herself. Sometimes the thing that looked most frightening from the outside turned out to be the safest place you'd ever known. As they walked back toward the villa where they'd spend their wedding night, Camilla realized she was no longer the woman who'd sat in that restaurant 6 months ago, trying to make herself invisible to avoid provoking her abuser's anger. She was stronger now, more confident, secure in her own value, and in the knowledge that she was loved completely and unconditionally. The thought made her smile as Dante lifted her over the threshold, his laughter mixing with hers as they began the first night of their married life. Outside, the Mediterranean sang its ancient song to the stars, and inside, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds settled into the kind of happiness that comes from choosing love over fear, again and again, until it becomes as natural as breathing. Have you ever wondered how a single moment of courage can change everything? How one person's decision to intervene, to care, to step forward instead of walking away, can transform not just their own life, but the life of someone they've never even met. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with passion or attraction, but with one soul recognizing another's need for safety and choosing to provide it, no matter the cost. Because real love, the kind that lasts and grows and transforms everyone it touches, isn't about possession or control or the need to diminish others to feel powerful. It's about seeing someone's true worth and spending your life helping them see it too. It's about choosing to be brave when it matters most and trusting that sometimes, when you save someone else, you end up saving yourself.